In this video, I'm going to show you how to decorate this Minions cake, and I am starting with my cakes already iced and they are in the refrigerator waiting to be decorated. I have tons of videos showing you how I do that process, and that will be linked below. And also, any of the tools that I use will be linked in the description as well. So let's get started.
All right, I know I sound like a broken record, but I have to say it. I have Tylose powder mixed into all of my fondant. I only use marshmallow fondant. I sprinkle a little bit of this on there, knead it in there, roll it out, let it sit. It's going to set up harder and make it so much easier to work with. This will be linked in the description. I have a piece of non-slip pad underneath my cutting board so it doesn't slide around, an X-Acto knife with a wet paper towel, a Dresden tool, and a little bit of water. And please ignore my nails. I took them off. I'm growing them out. I'm trying to be patient with them, and I slammed my thumb in my car door. That's why that looks like that. So just ignore my nails. But anyway, I rolled this yellow fondant out pretty thick. I measured my cake and printed that topper out the size that I wanted it to be, and I'm using my trace cut and smooth method to make this number topper. I will link this picture in the description. So I'm tracing this on here, and then since this is a thicker piece of fondant, I'm just sticking the tip of my X-Acto knife into the fondant to create a guideline. Once you create a guideline, it's going to prevent you from messing up the top part of the fondant when you cut it out. So then I'm sticking the tip all the way down to the cutting board and using that guideline to cut this out. And it's an extra step, but it makes it so much easier and it makes your pieces look a little prettier. So you have to smooth your fondant after you cut it. So I flipped it upside down. I'm taking my fingers and my tools and just rounding the edges, smoothing it out. This is going to be on the top of the cake, so it has to look pretty from the front and the back. And I just set that aside on a cutting board, and now I rolled this fondant out pretty thin, and I'm tracing the blue part on here. So it's just that bottom half. And then again, I'm going to cut it out. I don't need a guideline since this is a thinner piece of fondant, and just smoothing my cuts, get a little bit of water behind it and stick that down. And now I want to make the little pocket, so I found that little piping tip that was the same size. I aligned it on top of there just to make sure that I'm cutting it to the right size and sticking that down. And now I want to do the same thing for the black piece. Do you see how I have to look past the eye and figure out where the line goes? That's the trick to a lot of this trace cut and smooth. So I'm making sure that it fits, and it does. And then I'm going to get a little bit of water behind it and stick that to the yellow. And then I'm just taking my Dresden tool and making this little detail on the pocket. Now I have my circle cutter set, and I'm just taking one out and seeing which one is the right size. I rolled that gray fondant out about a ½ inch thick, and I'm just cutting a bigger circle and then taking a smaller one, making sure I have an even border and cutting out the inside. And then again, do I even have to say it? I'm going to take my fingers and smooth it so it looks pretty. And now I'm cutting a white piece of fondant out, and that's going to fit on the back. So I'm using the same cutter to cut that yellow piece as well, and I used a bigger circle cutter to cut the yellow to give it like an eyelid look. Let's get a little bit of water on the back, and I'm going to stick that to the white fondant, and you can see it's just slightly smaller than that gray piece, so it wouldn't stick out the side. Getting a little bit of water underneath the eyelid, and then putting that down on the white fondant, using my tools to make sure that it is in the correct position. Then I used a round piping tip to cut out the iris, and I'm using this tool just to make some impressions in the iris, which that's just a little extra of me. You don't have to do that. And then I cut out a little piece of black fondant for the pupil, get a little bit of water behind it, and stick that down to the white fondant. And I'm going to set that aside so it can dry. And now, again, I'm doing the same thing. So I measured my cake. I made sure I printed that out the size I wanted it to be. That black fondant is rolled out probably about a ½ inch thick. And then since this is a thicker piece of fondant, I am doing a guideline cut first, and then once I have that done, I'm going to stick the tip all the way down to the cutting board and cut this out. And again, smoothing my cuts to make it look nice and pretty. Now I'm going to realign it on top of the picture so it dries to the correct shape, and let this dry at room temperature flat so it can stiffen up. Now I rolled this yellow fondant out like a medium thickness, like a ½ inch thick, and I'm still doing the same technique to make the name. So I'm tracing all the letters except the O, and it is a thicker piece of fondant. Now I do want to cut out the center pieces first. I always say you want to cut out the center of the letters and the numbers first and smooth that with your tools before you cut the rest of the letter out. It's just so much easier to cut the center pieces when it's still attached to the rest of the fondant. That way you're not going to distort the letter. And again, like I said, this is a thicker piece of fondant, so I'm doing a guideline cut first, and then I'm going to cut the rest of these letters out. and I realign them on top of the picture so they can dry to the correct shape. Now I want to make a little eyeball for the O, so I'm just taking my circle cutter to make sure that I have the right size. And again, I'm making this eye the same way that I did it before, making the gray piece, and then I'm going to cut that white piece of fondant out and get a little bit of water behind it and stick it to the white piece. And then I want to create the eyelid. So cutting the piece out that's the size of the center part of the gray, and then using a bigger one to contour it and using my tools to get it in there. And then doing the same thing with my tool with the iris, getting a pupil in the middle and sticking it to the white fondant. And beautiful, that looks good. I'm going to set that aside at room temperature so it could dry. And now I want to make the goggles, and this had to be about 5.5 inches wide, so I'm making sure that this is wide enough. And this may be confusing, just bear with me. So I'm not pushing this all the way down. I just want to make the impression in here, and I wanted those circles to touch in the middle. And then I'm getting a smaller circle cutter so I can cut the center of these goggles out, just like I did before. So I'm making sure that I have an even border the whole way around and kind of twisting it as I push it down. That way I'm not going to distort the fondant. And then I'm going to take that same circle cutter and cut out this yellow fondant, which is pretty thick. I cut 2 of those out, and then I'm getting a little bit of water on the inside there. And then I'm going to put the yellow fondant in there, and I'm really going to press it down to make sure that the edges are sticking, so it's sticking to that gray fondant. I'm just making a little mark as to where the edges are going to go. That will make sense in a second. And then I'm taking my X-Acto knife and cutting an even border around this entire thing, stopping where I made those marks on the side and making sure just that it's even the whole way around. And once I have the guideline done, I'm going to stick the tip all the way down and cut it out. I'm going to stop where it meets that side piece and then cut it off to the side. So the side pieces are going to attached to the little ribbon that goes around it. You'll see what I mean, but I'm going to carefully remove the excess, flip it upside down, smooth it with my fingers, flip it right side up, smooth it with my fingers and my tools, and I'm just cutting the excess off of the end. Now I'm cutting a bunch of little dots here. I just used a number 12 piping tip, and I'm getting a little bit of water behind each one. I'm doing 1 in the middle, 2 on each side, and then 2 in the middle. So there's 5 going underneath each one. So I did it on the top and the bottom. Now I have some Rollcom Super Silver, and I'm going to mix it with a little bit of lemon extract in this cup. And I want to paint the silver. So I should have done it before I filled it with the yellow, but I didn't. So whatever, I just have to be careful. So I'm just painting this silver. And I did set it on a paper towel so I don't get silver all over my cutting board, but making sure I get on the sides and on all those dots. And if you get a little bit of silver on the yellow, no big deal. I dipped that paintbrush in the lemon extract, and I'm just using that lemon extract to erase that. And then I'm doing it for these smaller pieces as well. Again, I should have done it before I put the eyes in there, but I didn't. So you just have to be careful when you're painting these silver. Now I hope this doesn't get confusing, so bear with me. So I'm cutting out the brown irises again and using my tool just to make the little impressions in there. And then I used a smaller piping tip to cut out the pupils and an even smaller one to cut out the accents. I'm getting a little bit of water behind each one and sticking it to the white fondant. And then I'm cutting off part of the eye because this is going to go in the top part of the goggles. This will make sense as it continues. So I'm cutting the eye off because I want the eye to be in the corner, and then I'm cutting it straight. So the eye is in the corner. It'll make sense when I put it together. And then I'm getting a little bit of water behind it, and I'm sticking this to the yellow fondant. And do you see how the eye is over to the right? That's why I had to cut it that way. And then I want to get a little bit of water behind these tiny white pieces and stick that down as well. And I don't want that to dry out, so I'm going to store it in a Ziploc bag and set that aside. And now I want to make the mouth, so I'm just using that cutter to make an impression in the white fondant, and then I cut the black fondant out, and this way these teeth are going to contour to the shape of the black fondant. So I'm just using my X-Acto knife to cut it out a little more, and I'm using round cutters just to cut these teeth out. And it's no rhyme or reason. I'm using different sizes to make it just look like teeth. And I know that doesn't really help, but you can see what I'm doing. There's a bigger one in the middle. I'm kind of cutting it on the side. This way it can kind of fit together. So I had to trim this one as well. And then I'm just getting some water behind each of them and sticking them down. And then I'm just going to cut off that excess black fondant. And now I need a border. So I'm rolling out this yellow fondant into a really thin rope and getting a little bit of water around the edge of the mouth and then wrapping this around. I want to cut it on an angle at the bottom. This way it fits together a little bit better. And you can see as I push it together, there's not such a harsh seam where I cut that yellow fondant. And here is the mouth. I'm going to set that aside. I'm going to stack the cake. So I'm washing my hands. My hands are always clean when I'm handling my cakes. I got that out of the refrigerator. I can't use my ruler because this is too tall. So I held the straw up against the side of the cake, marked it with a marker, cut the marker off, put the straws in, get a little bit of icing down. And I got that out of the refrigerator. So this icing is cold and hard. I'm not going to mess it up. Let's make sure it's level and dowel it. I do have a video where I go into full detail on how I stack cakes, and I will link that in the description. Now I rolled this black fondant out about 1/4 inch thick, and I'm cutting 2 really long ribbons. I'm going to use my rulers just to straighten everything out. And then do you see how I have the black fondant in between my 2 rulers? This way it's not going to shift as I use my Dresden tool to make an impression in the middle, and then I'm sliding them down and then continuing. That way the fondant stays in the correct position. Now I have some piping gel. I'm getting that around the bottom of the top tier, and I'm starting in the back, wrapping this around where it meets. Just cut off the excess and push that together. I'm going to use my palette knife just to press it down. And I'm getting a little bit of icing behind these goggles and some piping gel around the edges so the icing doesn't seep out. And I just want to press this against the cake. Again, this cake is cold and hard. It's just out of the refrigerator. I'm not going to mess it up. And I want to anchor these goggles in here. So I'm pushing toothpicks down. I'm not pushing them straight in. They're down, kind of like a picture hook. And I'm hooking that fondant on these toothpicks. This way these goggles aren't going to slide down the cake. And I'm just making sure that it's really adhered to the cake. And now I want to get some piping gel around just underneath the top part of the bottom tier, and I'm going to put another black strip. So do you see where the black strip meets? That's why I cut a little bit extra off of the sides of those goggles, and then where it touches that silver part, I'm going to cut the excess off and press that down. And I want to make sure that it's even. So I got eye level with the cake, and I'm using my palette knife just to make sure that it's straight, and I'm getting rid of the excess cornstarch. Now I rolled this blue fondant out. Hey, it matches my sweatshirt. And I rolled that out really thin, and I'm cutting 3 ribbons and straightening them with my rulers, and I'm making the overalls. So I want to cut a straight edge on the bottom. I need it to be 2.5 inches tall, so I'm holding the 2.5 at the bottom and cutting that, and then it has to be 5 inches wide. How do I know that? I measured my cake to see how big I had to make this. And now I want to add the stitching. So I have a stitching wheel. Again, I'm putting it in between the 2 rulers. This way the fondant isn't going to shift and distort as I'm adding this stitching detail. And then I'm also adding the stitching along either edge of all of these 3 ribbons. And I'm going to re-straighten them with my rulers as I make the buttons. So I'm getting a little bit of Crisco in that button mold and then just rolling it into a ball, flattening it, and then pressing it in there. And I have my 2 buttons for my overalls. Let's get this cake out of the refrigerator, clean the cake board with a wet paper towel, get some water behind the back of these overalls, make sure that this is front and center, and I'm putting that down. And let's get a little bit of water along the bottom of the bottom tier, and I'm starting on one side, wrapping this around where it meets the overalls, cut it, and press that seam together. Then I'm going to get a little bit of icing behind the mouth and in the center, and then around the edges, get some piping gel down and stick the mouth down. I did it a little crooked just to give it a little character. Then I'm getting some water behind these overall strips. I'm starting in the front, I'm curving it up a little bit, and then I'm bringing it down in the back and then cutting it where it meets that bottom seam and pressing that together, and I'm doing the same thing on the other side. And now I want to get some water behind each of the buttons and stick those down. Now I want to put the name on the cake. I'm measuring the name to see where the center of the letter, where the center of the name is, and I'm grabbing that letter, getting some piping gel behind it and putting that in the center, and then I'm building this out to one side and then to the other. And then I just got a little bit of that black ribbon behind this little eyeball. That way it can look like it was connected like the goggles. I'm just using my palette knife to straighten it out. Now I want to make the arm, so I'm rolling this yellow fondant out pretty thick. You can see it's about like 3/4 of an inch thick, and I made sure I did 2 of them that were about the equal thickness, and I'm carefully cutting off the ends. This way I'm not going to distort that fondant. And I'm rolling some black fondant in a ball, and I'm tapering it at the bottom. I'm kind of creating a heart. I'm pushing it down in the top with my fingers, and these are going to be the hands. So you want this black fondant to be the same thickness as that yellow fondant. I'm cutting off the end, and you can see that it meets together, so it looks like it's little arms and hands. So I'm holding it up against the cake and making a little mark as to where I have to cut it. So I'm cutting that edge off, and then I need to taper it. So I'm starting on the outer edge. I'm cutting it to the inner edge. That way it makes the fondant a little thinner, and it sticks to the cake a little better. It's not going to stick out so much. So I'm getting a little bit of icing down at the top, and then some piping gel down at the bottom. I just feel like icing sticks a little better. And then I'm sticking that right underneath that highest part where the overalls are, and then just bringing that around the front. And I'm using my dry paintbrush just to remove any excess icing that's sticking out. And then these arms are a little long, so I just took some scissors and cut that excess fondant off. And then I'm getting some piping gel down where it's touching the fondant, and a little bit on the back where it's going to touch the cake. Now I did this off camera, but I screwed these skewers in here. So I twisted it in there so I didn't distort these decorations. And you have to make sure that it is center in there and it's not going to poke out the side. And I just want to get some toothpicks, one on either side of here. This way when I stick it in the top, it's not going to twist. Get some icing that's the same color of the cake that it's going to be touching. Get that underneath. Press this down, and some icing is going to seep out underneath, and that's okay. I really want that to adhere to the top of the cake, so I'm just going to take my dry paintbrush and remove this excess icing. And here is the cake. How cool is that?
So there you go. How adorable is this cake? Now this is a design that I've done in the past, and she asked me to make this cake for her, and I made it slightly different. I made the blues a little bit different. I feel like the first one was a little too royal blue, and after looking at the minions, I see that their overalls looks more of like a denim color, so I opted to use Wilton Delphinium blue rather than just a royal blue color, and that will be linked in the description. So this cake on the inside, the top tier is a 2-layer torted 5-inch, and the bottom tier is a 3-layer not torted 7-inch. And I have a video where I talk about when I tort and when I don't tort my cakes, and that will be linked below. I wanted to make the bottom tier taller so I would have enough decorating space. If I only did 2 layers, then I wouldn't have enough space for the mouth because the goggles and the overalls would have been touching each other. So that's something that you need to think a little bit in advance before you bake your cakes, how much room you're going to need to decorate the cake. And it feeds about 30 to 40 people. So I think that's it. What new techniques did you learn in this video? I would love to know. Leave it in the comments below. And just a reminder, I have ebooks with all of my best recipes. I have my signature scratch pound cake recipes, all of my best Dr. Cake Mix recipes, my favorite buttercream icing and filling recipes, along with my favorite numbers and my favorite fonts. So they will all be linked in the description. And I do have a Cake Academy membership program where I can help you elevate your cakes to the next level. There are 3 tiers to this program. The base tier is called the Cake Pop tier, and in that tier you get early access to all of my YouTube content, along with free and discounted extras being those ebooks that I just mentioned. And you also get exclusive access to content that I create only for my Cake Academy members. And then the top 2 tiers both have all of those perks, along with access to my exclusive Facebook group. And in that group, we do classes. I've gone live teaching about buttercream and how to make fondant. We do cake critiques. We talk about pricing and customer complaints. I post all of the pictures of the cakes that I make along with how much I charge. And this is just a group of wonderful, supportive people. I am having so much fun. I'm learning from them. They're learning from me. And we would love to have you aboard. All that information is in the description. Please like this video if you liked it. And if you're enjoying my tutorials, I would be so grateful if you could buy me a coffee. My link is down below. And I would love it if you would keep in touch on socials, and you can check out my website. And if you want to stick around, you can watch this video next and hit subscribe and the bell if you haven't already. Thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. And remember, it's cake. Have fun. I will see you on the next one. Bye.